At the moment, I am currently reading Journey to the West, a Chinese classic in 4 volumes here, which I've gotten out of my school library. And I've just finished volume 1. So I thought I would make a video giving my thoughts on volume 1 before I moved on to volume 2. Now, to a certain extent, this is a little bit silly. Because the fact that this book is in 4 volumes is just purely because of the convenience of the publishers. That is, it doesn't fit into one binding. But this isn't really 4 different books. This is one huge book that's just been subdivided into volumes for the ease of making them into books. I believe that the division of this book into different volumes will depend on different publishers. So, for example, a different publisher might publish this as 3 volumes instead of 4, and this publisher does 25 chapters for each volume. That might be different for a different publisher. By the way, the version I'm using here is the one published by Foreign Language Presses in Beijing, using the translation by W.J.F. Jenner, if that helps anybody. So when I say volume 1, that term is a little bit meaningless. It only applies to this specific edition, chapters 1 through 25. Nevertheless, I've decided that rather than trying to review this whole thing at once, I'm going to try and give my thoughts volume by volume as I go through, and then after I get through all 4 volumes, maybe do one video looking back at the whole series, the whole book. But the other thing is, because I was traveling the previous month, I never made a video introducing this book. So I thought I'll combine them both into this video. I'll give some background information about this book, talk about why I'm reading it, and then give my thoughts on volume 1. So background information for this book. This is one of those things. I never knew that this book existed until I was in my 20s and I was living in Japan. And I had studied literature in college. I was a literature minor. So it's one of those things where sometimes you don't even know what you don't know, huh? And I suspect there are a lot of other people out there who have no idea what this book is. On the other hand, this book is popular in certain communities, and maybe I'll talk about that later. So it might be interesting. Just leave a comment. Are you familiar with this book? Are you not familiar with this book? Where are you from? How did you learn about it? How popular is it in your community, etc.? But for anyone who's not familiar, I'm going to give some background information, and hopefully I'm going to get all my facts right. I'm going off here from memory, so be a little bit forgiving if I get something wrong, or you can correct me nicely in the comments. But this is a Chinese classic written in the 16th century about a monk and his disciples who journey to the West, to India, to get some Buddhist scriptures so they can bring it back to China. It is loosely, very loosely, based on a real historical event that happened in the 7th century, when there really was a Chinese monk who did travel on foot all the way to India to get some Buddhist texts, which he then brought back to China. Over the centuries, this story of the monk and his journey became more and more embellished, and more folk tales were added to it, until it became this huge, big story. According to the introduction that accompanies this volume, there is some debate about who actually put it into its final literary form and to in what circumstances it was finally written down, but the version we have here is attributed to Wu Cheng'en. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, so I'll of course leave a written version of that in the description. And this is what is considered one of the four great Chinese classics. Now, this designation of four great Chinese classics, I believe, is something that Chinese scholars themselves agreed upon in the 19th century. I don't know a whole lot about it, but this is at some point there was a discussion in China about what is the Chinese literary canon. And this, along with three other books, was selected as one of the four great Chinese classics. Now, like I said, I first heard about this when I went to Japan, because in Japan, this story is very popular in adaptation. There are TV shows in Japan based off of it, comic books in Japan based off of it, and animations in Japan based off of it. Now, one of those TV shows, which was produced in the late 70s, I believe 78 to 80, known either as Monkey or Monkey Magic, was dubbed into English and broadcast in Australia. I mean, it was all, I think it was, according to Wikipedia, it was broadcast in England and New Zealand and Australia. Sorry, the UK. The UK, New Zealand, and Australia. But it seems, just on my own anecdotal observation, to have had the most impact in Australia, because when I went to Japan, and I first arrived in Japan in 2001, in my early 20s, and all my Australian friends were very familiar with the TV show Monkey Magic, and a lot of them told me that this was, their first exposure to Japanese culture, and this is, what they associated Japan with. So for Australians of a certain generation, that TV show was apparently very influential. Now it's a Chinese book, but the Chinese classics are also part of the Japanese classics. In the same sense that we have like a Western literary canon, where like the you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, even if you're from England or America, just because it's the Western canon, right? These Chinese classics are part of the Asian literary canon. Now, sorry, I should back up a little bit, because some people might be confused why the TV show is called Monkey Magic, if it's about a Buddhist monk who is traveling to the West. So sorry, something I forgot to mention is, over the course of this story being embellished through the centuries, the monk was given a lot of sidekicks. So he was given one monkey who went with him on his journey, a pig who went with him on his journey, a dragon who's taking the form of a horse, and some sort of creature called Friar Sand, who's some sort of reformed demon or something like that. I don't have not entirely clear yet to me. But anyways, the monkey and the pig are the big ones who are accompanying the monk. So the monk is accompanied by a monkey and a pig. And of these, the monkey is really the standout character. So much that almost the whole first half of Volume 1 is given up to the monkey's backstory and describing where this monkey came from and how he became so powerful. So I'm going to have to wait and see how this continues out through the subsequent volumes. But Volume 1 is very much the monkey's story, as much as it is anyone's story. So the monkey has kind of taken over this story. And that's why a lot of adaptations are referred to as the monkey or Monkey Magic, etc. So anyways, I found out some more about this book. I learned it was very influential in Japan and TV show that was popular in Australia. And I believe that it's the inspiration for the Dragon Ball anime, although I've never gotten into Dragon Ball. So, you can let me know in the comments below if that was your first introduction to the story. But then the other thing is, I'm now teaching English in Vietnam. And when I came into Vietnam, I also realized how popular this book was in Vietnam. And again, it's a big part of pop culture in Vietnam. There was again a TV show, a Chinese miniseries. Sorry, miniseries isn't the right word. A Chinese TV show, because it had like 100 episodes. Chinese TV show based on this book, sometime in the 2000s. I'm not sure the exact date, which was dubbed into Vietnamese and was enormously popular in Vietnam. So that if I talk to Vietnamese friends, they will automatically remember this TV show and talk about how they watched it as children, younger Vietnamese friends. And again, seems to have had a huge impact on that generation. And I'm also told that this book is popular or influential in the Korean literary tradition, although I've not lived in Korea. And of course, it's well known wherever there's a Chinese diaspora, so Malaysia and Singapore, etc. So, I mean, this is interesting. You'll have to indulge me for a little bit going off on this tangent, but there was a moment when the penny just dropped for me, and I realized that there was this whole literary canon for half the world's population. I mean, billions of people. That was something I completely didn't know about, or hadn't known about. And not only Journey to the West, but the other big Chinese classic, which I haven't read yet, so I'm not going to talk about, but Romance of the Three Kingdoms. That's another one of the four great Chinese classics that was huge in Japan. Seems to be popular in Vietnam as well. So, it's not only China, although China itself is like a billion people, right? More than a billion people. But then it's every other country that's in China's orbit, Japan and Korea and Vietnam and who knows where else, that these books are considered the classics. And we in America don't know anything about them. I mean, isn't that strange? Sorry, I know I'm going off on a rant here, but just indulge me on it. I think that's really strange. I considered myself well-read. I studied literature in college, and just had no idea, or I wasn't even thinking that there was this whole literary canon that I was unaware of that was half the world's population. And round about the time that penny was dropping, and I was just thinking how strange it is that we in America are so oblivious to these books. This was a few years ago, but some articles started making the rounds on the internet, complaining about college students who were complaining about how they had to read too many white men in school. One of these culture wars that flares up time to time. There were some college students who were complaining that the literature curriculum wasn't diverse enough. And then there were some people on the other side saying, what? How can you talk about getting rid of Shakespeare and Ovid just because they were white men? We have to keep those people in the curriculum because they're the canon. And it struck me that the conception maybe on both sides of this debate was to put put people in the canon who represent like minority groups, like more black lesbians. For example, we need to include more literature from Native American tribes. Something like that, I think, was a stereotype both sides were operating under. And it struck me, I thought, nobody on either side of this debate is even making the connection that there's a whole canon of literature over in Asia that's not only China, but Japan and Vietnam and Korea and half the world's population that we aren't even talking about over here. I wrote up a blog post at the time complaining about it. It was a few years ago, but I'll link to it in the description down below just so you can see where I'm coming from here. And as I wrote up the post, I said, okay, I have to admit I haven't read these books either. But I at least know they exist, and I'm aware of this deficit in my reading, which is kind of a weasel way out, isn't it? And essentially, after having written that post, I had kind of committed myself to sooner or later getting around to reading the Chinese literary classics, or at least some of them. So here I am now, finally putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and getting around to reading Journey to the West, one of the great classics of the Chinese canon and the largest part of Asia as well. So this is chapters 1 through 25. I should back up, actually. There's the danger of doing these things unscripted. I just thought of a couple things I forgot to mention. One thing is these books have a reputation. It's a long book, a long story, over in 4 volumes, and has a reputation of being very repetitive. So the monk and the Buddhist monk and the monkey and the pig and the other 2 guys are going along. Some sort of demon comes and captures the monk, and then the monkey has to rescue him. Apparently it's very episodic. They're going along, they encounter a demon, they defeat the demon. They go along, they encounter the next demon, they defeat the demon. And this repetitive nature of the book and the episodic nature of the book has defeated people who are better readers than me. People just get tired of it halfway through. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen to me, because I'm making this video talking about my commitment to finishing the book. But we'll see. Maybe one day I'll make a video saying, okay, I'm abandoning this book. What's the booktube term for that? DNF. I'm going to DNF this book. So we'll see how it goes. There's a little bit of that in volume 1, but I found volume 1 incredibly readable and incredibly enjoyable, and I'll talk about that more in a sec. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is I was talking to years ago, I was talking to a Chinese friend, an exchange student, and he was telling me that people who only read this book at the surface level, just about adventures of a monk and his funny sidekicks, are really not understanding half the story. Apparently there is so much in this book that is references to religion or culture. There was a lot of allusions in this book to the history and politics of the time. Kind of like Don Quixote, right? Don Quixote is another book where you read it on the surface, and it's just like this wacky story about this guy who thinks he's a knight. But then apparently, if you consult any of the commentary about this book, this every episode is symbolic about this, or it's some sort of criticism about this episode in Spanish history, or it's some sort of criticism about the Catholic Church, or just like there's a deeper layer to anything. Sorry, deeper layer to everything. Apparently, Journey to the West is like that. Now, on the one hand, that kind of thing really intrigued me. Like, oh, isn't it so cool to consider how deep this book is? On the other hand, that's the kind of thing that just kind of makes you want to give up and say, well, okay, well, what's the point? I'm never going to be able to understand everything anyway, so might as well just not even try, right? Yeah, the point of my Chinese friend in telling me that, I think what was his point? I don't remember. This conversation was years ago. I think it was making the point of why books like this need to be studied in school rather than just kind of read casually. But that being said, I've made the decision to read this casually rather than to attempt to understand everything. I mean, I've also read online that if you don't really read the original Mandarin, you're kind of missing half the book. You know, like apparently the way that the monkey speaks in the original Chinese is really boastful because he's using the honorific terms in a certain way that can't get translated into English. So I'm sure I'm missing out on tons of stuff. But at a certain point, you just have to throw up your hands and say, oh, okay, well, this is the level that I can engage with the book at. So this is how I'm going to engage it with. There are, according to Wikipedia, there are 2 unabridged translations in English. This one is by W.J.F. Jenner. The other one is, I forget, Arthur something, was it? I'll try and look that up later and put that in the description. So, of the 2, yes, Anthony C. Wu. Now, Anthony C. Wu's translation, I'll try and write it in the description. His translation has like tons of notes in it, apparently. So you can, to a certain extent, I guess, learn what these various allusions are as you're writing it. This translation by W.J.F. Jenner does not have those notes. Now, this was not in my introduction, but I read somewhere on the internet that W.J.F. Jenner deliberately left out all the notes. I mean, he's got a couple footnotes in the back, but only a couple. He left out all those notes because he said to himself, I don't want to bog down the reader with these kind of notes. I want the reader to enjoy this book as a reading experience, and if they want the notes, they can always consult Anthony C. Wu's translation. So this is meant to be read without worrying about what allusions are being made in this book to 16th century Chinese politics. I don't know. A certain part of me thinks it might be interesting to get the book with all the footnotes in it and, try and just learn about what all those allusions are. But I didn't really choose this translation. This was just the translation that was in my school library. So I'm just going off of this because this is what was available to me. Okay, I think that's all the background information I want to give about this book. Now it's time to talk about my thoughts on Volume 1 itself. And I'm just actually realizing now that I'm just about out of memory on this phone. Sorry, usually I can film for longer on this phone, but I must have forgotten to delete my old videos before I started filming. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to split this into 2 videos after all. This video is going to be, we'll call it my started video, why I decided to read this book and the background things to the book. And then the next video, will be my thoughts on volume 1. So stay tuned for that video.